Gonna admit people. Here we go.
Ann Arbor is live. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the second meeting of MySec Ann Arbor. Thank you, everyone that joined and everyone that might be watching on the stream. Super exciting. Yeah. So getting into it, I'm just going to start with community updates, and that's really going to be it. So going to get some Zoom stuff out the way. Of course, you got to do that. Otherwise, it's not a Zoom presentation. So community updates. If you have a cool topic or some research to present, that's awesome because we're always looking for speakers. So just reach out to me on Slack and we'll probably get you slotted in. And then other MySec meetings are happening basically every day this week. And you can check out the MySec events page for all of that information. And then if you're looking for more security community in Ann Arbor, I definitely recommend you check out ArbSec. And they have some really good conversations over there in their Slack channel. So on to the talk for tonight, unless anyone has any community updates they want to add themselves. Otherwise, I'm really excited to have Emily give the talk on creating malware labs with Vagrant. So yeah, let's get into that. I'll stop sharing. Yeah. And unmute yourself, Emily.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Give me just a moment while I share my screen with you all. All righty, and can you see my presentation?
You're all good.
Cannot.
No, this is the wrong screen. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I thought the GitHub was the presentation.
How about desktop too?
Now I can.
Excellent. All right, hello everyone. My name's Emily. You can also find me on Twitter at droidmalware. A little bit about me before we go into this presentation. I've got 2 years experience as a security analyst at a major MSP, and I have a degree in information assurance and cyber defense, as well as an associate's degree in computer programming. I enjoy participating in cyber competitions, and I enjoy doing CTFs. Some competitions I've competed in before have been Michigan CCDC and ISTS. A little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing today. We'll be talking about automating malware labs with Vagrant, and this talk's going to be about 20 minutes, give or take. We'll touch on what is Vagrant and how do we use it. We'll describe the malware lab architecture that we'd like to build, and we'll touch on accessing the infrastructure that I've built, and also how you're going to go about building your own lab with Vagrant. We'll go over some warnings, and then we'll also review some failures that I had that you might be able to avoid. And we'll end with some sources that you can go to learn more. And we'll also end with the discussion amongst ourselves or any questions that you might have for myself regarding Vagrant. So why malware analysis? I wanted to build an environment that would help me determine the type of malware that I was looking at, and if found within an incident response, the extent to which a system might be compromised. So ideally, I'm trying to build an environment that's going to be able to identify network signatures and host-based signatures that I can take and return back to use for prevention and detection controls. We want to take an environment that can perform these actions, and we want to make it repeatable so that I could reuse it in the future or build upon it. So what does the architecture look like? Locally, on my laptop, I've got 16 gigs of RAM and a pretty small processor, just an i5 6th generation. And on it, I'm running VirtualBox, which is going to be virtualizing my virtual machines, and I'll be using Vagrant to manage those boxes. The environment that I'd like to build is essentially going to be a Windows machine that I'll be using to analyze Windows malware. And I'll be using this for dynamic analysis for the most part. And what I want to do is I want to funnel all of the internet traffic that's coming out of there. I want to funnel it into an Ubuntu box that I'm using for monitoring and analysis, where I'm going to be simulating both DNS and the internet. So getting started. Getting started with Vagrant is really easy. It's fast. All you need is the Vagrant binary itself, a Vagrant file, and some sort of provider. By default, Vagrant works with VirtualBox out of the box, so you don't have to configure anything. And you'll be able to download Vagrant directly from the HashiCorp's Vagrant Up website. The hello world of Vagrant is 3 lines. You need only Vagrant init, and to specify a base box, Vagrant Up, and Vagrant SSH, and you're into a running box. Vagrant comes with several commands that you can use to manage your virtual machines. And if you go through the getting started documentation provided by HashiCorp, again, you only need 3 of these commands in order to get a virtual machine up and running that you can use to go ahead with and start developing. When you run Vagrant init, Vagrant's going to initialize your local folder with a Vagrant file. And the Vagrant file is what Vagrant uses to create your virtual machines in your provider. Depending on the box that you specify when running Vagrant init, that'll determine what box is shown here. Other than that, you're going to get like a vanilla file that you'll be able to run and will work immediately. You'll find out more within the documentation, but within that Vagrant file, you have further configuration controls that you can really use to further configure your Vagrant environments. And some of those controls are specific to Windows. As you can see, there's WinRM controls, and some of them can be used for Linux or Windows. And you can even specify scripts to run within your provisioned box after Vagrant starts it up for you. And you can specify what that is within your Vagrant file, or you can just point to a local installation script that you have already written in the past. And if you're wondering, can I provision multiple machines with one Vagrant file? You can, absolutely. And the process itself is fairly painless. The only difference here is instead of a single Vagrant file where you have configuration options that you're specifying for a single box, here you're going to break it out into essentially like 2 loops, where each machine will have their own configurations. MyLab. So there's 2 ways that you can get to the boxes that I created. One way is to clone my GitHub repository, automating malware labs with Vagrant. And it's really fast. I could share this repository with anybody by sharing this link. They could CD into the directory, and then from there, Vagrant up these machines and have an environment ready to go. Alternatively, you can get the boxes I created directly from Vagrant Cloud by typing in my handle. And you'll notice that there's 2 boxes provided here, an Ubuntu analysis box and a Windows 10 development box. And this is just an example of how you can get those boxes without even going to Vagrant Cloud. You can simply Vagrant init and then specify the base box that you're looking for that is available on Vagrant Cloud. So you want to build your own malware lab with Vagrant. If you haven't started with Vagrant at all, I'd recommend you get started with their base box so you get a feel for what's going on behind the scenes. You're going to initialize with perhaps the HashiCorp Bionic 64 base box. If you look and see what was created in that directory, you'll see that Vagrant file, and then you can open up that Vagrant file and you'll see that that really base vanilla configuration. You might decide, oh, there's a lot I want to change here, after which point you'll have a new Vagrant file that has a bunch of specifications and is better suited for whatever environment you're trying to build. And let's say I don't want to do an inline shell script. I can provide the external shell script that I like better. Or I have the option to manually create my virtual box, manually go in there and add whatever packages I want to install or remove whatever I'd like, make those configurations, and then go back into my terminal on my host machine and export the virtual box that I created by hand. The command that you see there is how you do that. We'll go into this further in just a moment. And that box that's created is then uploaded to Vagrant Cloud. So how do you export that base box? You can do it very simply with Vagrant package and then simply specifying the name of the box on VirtualBox. Or you can add other commands, like if you have a desired output name, and if you'd like to include any extra files, let's say if there's a specific Vagrant file that you would like to be provided with that box, you can package it directly from the terminal so that when your user does pull that box down from Vagrant Cloud, the Vagrant file that you wish to be provided with that box is already provided. And you'll need some sort of checksum in order to upload the box. So I just use MD5. And really quick, we'll see how easy it is to upload this box now. Super easy. I won't take too long on this. You're just gonna click on that new Vagrant box. You're in your dashboard, your Vagrant dashboard. Here, I just put in some dummy test information, but you'll give your box a name and a short description. You'll say you'd like to create the box. We'll start off with our first version and give it another dummy description of test. And from here, you'll have like a base page that'll appear, but this won't yet be visible to Vagrant Cloud. You'll need to actually upload your box. So to do that, you'll need to specify what provider that box works for. In this case, VirtualBox. I'll let Vagrant Cloud know what the checksum is to expect for the box that I'm uploading. And then I'll actually go ahead and upload that box. Depending on the size of the box, it'll take a little while, it'll take a long while. This box here was about 4 gigs, and it took maybe 20 minutes to upload. And my Windows 10 boxes took several hours. So once it is uploaded, there'll be a small button that'll appear in the upper left-hand corner that'll allow you to actually publish and release that box. And it's as simple as that. It's ready, it's online, ready for the world to pull down and use, and ready for you to access over and over again for your CTFs or for your malware environment. We'll go over just a couple of warnings. For some common security advice just for local virtualization in general. Always keep your software up to date. When you're exploring malware, it's a great idea to have a fresh VM with each investigation just to ensure that everything that you're viewing is certainly from the malware that you are investigating. Might be obvious, but don't access or store sensitive information in the VM. What does that mean? Don't log into your personal accounts. Don't leave any tracks that might be able to identify you personally in the VM. Don't allow malware to reach the internet. And this is of special concern with Vagrant. We'll get into that in a moment. But if you don't know what it is, and even if you do know what it is, it's just best practice to prevent that malware from being able to reach out and potentially harming others or alerting the people who are actively on the malware campaign. And a common advice is to nest your VMs inside non-like host operating systems to prevent escape. So in layman terms, what that means is it's suggested that if you're looking at Linux malware, virtualize your Linux VMs on a Windows host. And if you're looking at Windows malware, virtualize your Windows VMs on a Linux host. In the off chance that the malware is able to escape, it's going to find itself in an environment it's probably not suited for it. So Vagrant and the public internet. Vagrant was designed for development purposes in mind and not necessarily designed for malware research labs. And so just like anything else that you go and configure and use, there you need to take a moment and ensure that the Vagrant boxes that you are spinning up aren't connected to the internet and do have the settings that you require to safely analyze and malware. Um, just as an example, when creating my Windows 10 box using Vagrant, I added a whole bunch of settings that might make my box either firm or vulnerable. Um, for instance, you're able to access my Windows 10 box, the WinRM services on my Windows 10 box using Vagrant, so that Vagrant can go in there and configure the desired services. And while you can set up the machine to clean up after that, you need to actually do that. Um, Another default specific Vagrant consideration is by default, Vagrant has a shared sync folder. Um, so if you do nothing and you Vagrant up and just go on ahead, you will have a folder that's linking your virtual machine and your host machine. And so in order to resolve that issue, you just need to include this line in your Vagrant file. Um, Another issue, something that came up in chat earlier today, is that uh, by default, Vagrant requires the NAT adapter to be configured on requires NAT to be configured on adapter 1. And what that means is that because NAT is enabled by default, your Vagrant machine can access the public internet if your host can access the public internet. When you manually disable NAT on adapter 1, you will no longer be able to access your virtual machine using Vagrant. But that's not a huge issue, because if you manually enable it again, you can once again use Vagrant to manage that virtual box. So depending on your workflow, you may decide to, when provisioning your machine, you may decide to disconnect from the NAT adapter, but know that at that point, Vagrant can no longer reach that virtual machine. And another consideration to have is preventing malware VM detection. There is a GitHub repository by H Firefox with an O called the VBox Harden Loader that approaches this issue, but there's certain things on a virtualized machine that quickly give it away that's being virtualized. For instance, the nick type virtuo, or you might notice the username and password of Vagrant, you being malware. So just like you're taking steps to harden your box before you expose it to the internet, you may also want to further harden it to help prevent detection by the malware that you're analyzing. And let's go over some of the failures that I experienced. First, real simple, measuring local resource allocation. If you have a modest machine like me, you might run into this problem. At first, I tried to allocate, I've only got 16 gigs of RAM. I tried to allocate 8 to the Windows VM, 4 to Ubuntu, and I thought 4 would be enough for virtualization. It was not. But this is pretty easily remedied by reducing the Ubuntu analysis VM and then increasing which thereby increased the amount of leftover gigs. So that was a simple problem. I had a lot of issues uploading my Windows box to Vagrant Cloud because it was so large. And when I finally got the first box uploaded, I wasn't able to use it because before I uploaded it, I had revoked the version to which it was uploaded because I hadn't used Vagrant Cloud before and I was just testing things out. So that was really sad. And to kind of give you an idea, if you're like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about, when you update your box version, you can choose to revoke it. And having not understood the platform at the time, I didn't want there to be a box that didn't work just sitting out there. And so I revoked the version. So just pay attention to what is live and where you're uploading your large files. I was able to upload the second file, but it was so long to upload that I had already created a third release before it was even finished uploading. And that was more of like my internet at home issue rather than a Vagrant issue. Know that there are alternatives too. You can also point your box can be stored, let's say, in Google Cloud or in Azure. And what you could do instead is um, point the download to the external URL where it's being hosted. I chose not to do this because I wanted to host my virtual machine. I wanted to host my Vagrant boxes for free. And again, returning to the poor internet issues, I was having a real issue downloading my Windows box that was continuously airing out. However, it was determined that I was able to successfully uh, download my Windows box via um, in the cloud. So uh, this is something I have to work further through. I'm not really sure if the Windows 10 development box is ready to be used and is live or not. Um, but something to consider if this is an issue that you're experiencing at home, you might want to take a second and go and test your boxes in another environment that might have better internet services. Okay, and another thing you might run into is when you download those Vagrant boxes, some of them are a couple of gigs. I may have mentioned my Windows box is 17 gigs. My home, my the hard drive within my system is pretty much full, and so I had to redirect my Vagrant directory somewhere else so that I could store my new boxes without hitting my capacity. And to do that, you need only change your environment variable Vagrant home and let Vagrant know where the home directory should be stored so it could start storing those Vagrant boxes in a location it can actually use. And here I give you an example of what that command looks like to demystify that there, export Vagrant home, and then the path. All right. One of the last things that I had learned while creating and exporting Vagrant boxes was that you can create an invalid state if you provision a Vagrant box and then change some of those configurations manually within the VirtualBox provider and then go to export that via Vagrant. I know that's hard to read, so I took that warning message and reprinted it here. You'll see it complaining about entering an invalid state, and then later you'll see it's letting me know that it's not Vagrant's problem. So, and finally, one of my final conclusions that I came upon is that I was considering if I was using Vagrant, if my workflow was exactly right. I think the next steps with this project is that I might try to use Packer to help build my images, and then try and focus on using Vagrant for building my environment specifically. And I'm going to see if that helps resolve some of the issues that I had while creating and exporting those um, Vagrant boxes. And if you're wondering where to get started and you're just like not sure what a general workflow on how to build a malware lab, feel free to take a screenshot of what my workflow was. Nothing too crazy here. I'm just planning a network, planning the machines, uploading those machines, and then downloading them again so that I can execute on my goal. And if you'd like to learn more, I highly encourage you to check out the Vagrant documentation. It's an afternoon of light reading. And I also enjoyed learning malware analysis, and my favorite, practical malware analysis, if you'd like to know where to learn more. And there's also other GitHub repositories of people doing exactly what I'm trying to do. So if you'd like to take a look at some other examples, feel free to check out some of the repositories listed here. right, and I'll open it up to Q&A. Any questions for me, or just open it up to the community?
Yeah, I've got one. Actually, I think I have a couple.
Yeah, go for it.
So Vagrant Cloud came up in a couple times, and it it's pretty readily apparent from the Vagrant files that you showed us that by default a box is assumed to be in Vagrant Cloud. Like when you said HashiCorp / Bionic 64, that was a Vagrant Cloud box.
Hmm.
When you had one in your own namespace, that was in there. If I want to go and host one in my own hosting, is that difficult?
No, it's about as fast as making a Twitter account, quite frankly.
Okay, so is it just looking for like any HTTPS source or other places that are hosting them then?
I may have misunderstood your question. Can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
Like, could I just put it on any website host I have, and as long as it's accessible via HTTPS, I'm good to go then?
Oh, you're talking about hosting your box, like
Yeah.
pointing. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, and I don't have it up anymore. I was gonna show you that you could do that, but yeah, you literally just give it a URL. So you would just whatever you would use to wget, and then pull down that resource is what you can provide in that input spot.
And the
No.
documentation has plenty of places where it calls out examples like that.
Okay, cool. The second one's more of a comment, if I could.
Yeah, for sure.
So you went into a couple areas involving VM escapes, or preventing VM escapes in particular, which was really cool.
Yeah.
If anybody wants further reading on that, you and I discussed it a little bit earlier, but Tony Robinson's book on building virtual machine labs, when he goes into his settings, there's a couple areas in particular that he turns off on VirtualBox and a couple of the other hypervisors that are really helpful. So for instance, you can turn off the USB driver support for mice and have it use only a PS2 port, which is a
Okay.
smaller attack surface for malware to attack and potentially escape out through. And it's just one example. I don't remember all of them that are in there, but if people are really looking to lock it down across several hypervisors out there, then that's a really good resource to pick up. It's completely free right now. He just lets you pay what you want, or even pay $0 because he wants the educational information out there. So, highly recommend if people are going to experiment with this further, especially if they're going to do it with live malware samples, that they go ahead and pick that up as well. But yeah, that was really good. I learned some stuff that I'd never seen before.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then we also have a question in the chat from Hitesh. A nice presentation. And then he says, do you have any suggestions on cloud providers to use to run malware analysis? And what would be the suggested resource allocation for RAM and disk for, say, PCAP analysis? If you have any thoughts on that.
I don't have any thoughts specific to PCAP analysis necessarily. I think I really like this question. Also, hi Hitesh, thank you. I came across this too about midway through my research, and I would personally stick to Vagrant to provision my local resources, and I would instead use Terraform, I think, to provision any resources in the cloud. At which point, then any box creation, I would have to use, I think, Packer for. In terms of PCAP analysis specifically, I think the only thing I would really include is I would probably just download a base box, and then within my shell provision, within my I would provision just apt-get Wireshark, so I could look at Wireshark.
Emily, have you seen Detection Lab?
I've read the Medium article, and if you haven't, I I've encouraged anyone who hasn't to look it up. Just Detection Lab Medium should pull it up. But I haven't used it yet.
Okay. I haven't used it either, but the nice thing about Detection Lab is it has both the local options with Vagrant and it also has Terraform for provisioning it in the cloud. So it's kind of, you can not only use it in either form, but you can kind of see how people who want to make something that's portable between those two types of environments kind of structured their work in order to put it in either place.
Yeah, that's something that's on my list too. I think I actually have it referenced in the slides. It's one of the repositories to check out. I like that particular security researcher. He's written a couple of good articles.
Yeah, it's a really cool project and it's being updated regularly as well. So
That's awesome. Just kind of turn it around on the audience. Does anyone here have a malware lab? Just curious. And if so, where is it? Is it only local? Is it hybrid? I've got some machines in Azure that I'll use, but I'll typically only really use it for analyzing my disks that are already in the cloud. I'd be interested to hear anybody.
Yeah. So at my work, we've had a couple of people kind of go in and tinker with our malware lab. So we've got a separate entire network, an actual entire rack that's got a couple of old, basically SIM servers that have like 200 or 300 gigs of memory and a ridiculous amount of cores, and they're huge machines. So they're great for spinning stuff up in. So we actually had an extra ESI or VMware, the ESXi, I think it is. I can't remember. Not gonna make it.
That's a EXXi.
Yeah. I'm just having a brain fart. So we've actually spun up inside of there where we have a local network that has at least a pipe to the internet as well. So we do a lot of our malware execution. We've got Cuckoo in there and a couple of other fun tools that we'll play with when we need to. So we do something very similar though. I mean, we'll just spin up a Windows box and a Linux box and pipe traffic to the Linux box and then mess around with what we need to do. So it's good stuff.
mm-hmm.
Vagrant,
Cool.
awesome. You did an awesome job.
Thank you.
I was at a workshop at Circle City last year where they were doing a Cuckoo sandbox kind of detonation, and it was like hours of just manually downloading the VM and configuring it, getting it all ready, doing all the fiddly stuff with it. And then the end you did a single detonation and that was it. So it would definitely be interesting to see a vagrantized format of that because it would have cut out, I swear, 75% of the workshop time, and the rest of that could have just been used for detonation after detonation and really getting to know Cuckoo instead of like fiddly virtual box things walking around.
Yeah. And Cuckoo's one. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I agree with that. There's been so many classes I've had where like it's great to struggle together, like a group of 30 people trying to get like an appliance going. But like to learn troubleshooting techniques. But at the same time, as a professor, there's been many times where I'm like, seriously, the box isn't set up. This is your job, you know? So if I were running a class and I wanted to just make sure that the boxes worked for everybody and there were no excuses, absolutely no excuses, this is a method that I might try to use.
I'd say Cuckoo is one of those things too, where once you get it set up, you still have to kind of tune it to actually get it to be useful.
And that's the thing too. Like if it requires that much work to learn Cuckoo, like I'd rather spend like 3 out of my 4 hours working on Cuckoo things rather than like 3 out of 4 like, oh, you have to like get this virtual or Windows 10 image and get it configured and so on. And that's not to knock the instructor or anything. It's just like, you know, if you don't have the tool in front of you, you don't realize the possibilities for what you could use with it. But
yeah.
Emily, you were talking about like if you were teaching a class or a workshop or whatever, like completely non-ironically, I'm being completely serious here. Like you absolutely should consider like taking one of these setups and putting it forward as a workshop and like some future Converge or another workshop around here. Like with this kind of malware lab setup, it's the kind of thing where like people can see all the individual components. They don't see how to get to the end state unless somebody shows them to get there. Like,
Yeah.
you would get some serious traffic on that.
That sounds like fun, genuinely. And there's also some things about Vagrant. Like I'm not a Vagrant expert, by no means. I think that what I've created here is like very attainable for anyone who's learning Vagrant, this week or next week even. Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Dang, sorry. Go ahead. I'll remember it in a moment.
No, it's all good. That said, that idea is also very selfish on my behalf because I would definitely want to be in that workshop as well. But
Oh, that reminds me of the workshop. So something that would be kind of interesting, like my ideal Vagrant workflow, and this is fantasy, this is based not on technology. But before I started anything, it would be it'd be really nice to have a malware environment either locally or in the cloud using Vagrant or any tool where essentially I already have the environment pre-built, and then once I get that sample, I just ship that sample off and the automation process starts going, and eventually like I have an output of results that are like emailed somewhere or stored somewhere in a central repository, and then my stuff's automatically spun down. That's big scope, right? Looking at it at a smaller scope, I saw that you can alias your own Vagrant commands. I don't know if you guys knew that. That's something that I learned by reading through the documentation. So you can tell Vagrant that instead of like Vagrant up, you can write like Vagrant super cow or something. And then I'd like to like provide like a Vagrant, super cow, and then just pass along a malware binary and then have it eat that and eat it along on its way. I don't know how realistic that is or if Vagrant's the right tool for that. But ultimately, like that kind of workflow is like that easier cuckoo workflow, I think is what everyone's looking for.
I'm not sure what channel to put it in, but I mean, if you wrote that out in a slightly longer form, it would definitely be something interesting to at least do some like theorizing about.
Yeah, just open up a chat.
Yeah.
Because I was looking to Azure automation for that, in terms of like the workflow in an Azure environment. But it would be nice to have something that's reproducible for any environment, not just specific to Azure.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
There's a lot of interesting things you can do with trying to automate that sort of stuff.
yeah. Another thing, I'm just curious, does anyone spoof like fake internet during malware analysis? And if so, do you use anything other than iNetSim and Burp Suite?
So you're talking like faking the network comms for it?
Mm-hmm. Just faking, yeah.
I think
Just
Kyle
faking.
I'm trying to remember what I used to use. I used one. I think the one that you first mentioned I've used, but I thought there was another one.
That's all I could find is iNetSim. It's written in Perl on the weekends by a bunch of nice guys. Like I think a while ago, and I don't think it's still being developed. I'm not positive on that, but Perl. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased, but it just seems like it's not. Seems a little old.
There definitely is another one out there. I'll have to dig through my notes and see if I can find it. I'll send it to you.
Yeah. That's something like I'm just gonna be on the lookout for. I'm like, would that be an easy networking project? It seems like something that the Gopher community would have gotten done. I don't know why I think that.
Yeah, but super helpful though, especially for reversing or if you're doing like a live kind of malware analysis and just executing the binary and letting it go for as far as it can, then trying to capture what's going on. That's definitely worthwhile. A lot of fun.
Yeah, and I can accept that. There will be a lot of like gotchas that will just fail, and I'm fine with that. But just something. Well, I guess. Oh, dang it, we're back to cuckoo now though, because I see we're back to Kuka because then it's just detecting all the new. It's just detecting its analysis environment again. All right. I see.
Mark suggested fake net in the chat.
Fake net. Is that ISIMnet? Is that a little different? Let me Google it.
Oh, he just dropped a FireEye link to it. So Flare fake net NG.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, it's a FireEye.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's exactly what we're looking for. FakeNet's describing itself as a next generation dynamic network analysis tool.
Should be an interesting one to play with.
Yeah. And it's developed by the guys that wrote Practical Malware Analysis, it looks like. Andrew, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, Honig, and Michael Sikorsky.
How do you spell the Andrew name?
Honig.
Okay.
Another question for chat people. Is anyone using Vagrant here? Who's using Vagrant maybe once a quarter?
I use it in my open source project to act as the dev environment for the server component. So it's a much simpler kind of deal, but very useful nonetheless.
I have not used it yet.
After all these years? After all these years? Oh my God. Yeah, I use it, yeah.
You're personally betraying Kent by not using the tools of his now employer.
It's funny too, because like I've known about it and I've seen it, but I've had all my stuff like that I've used set up. And so it's like it's there, it's useful, and I'm good to go. So I haven't had like a need to rebuild anything yet. But like right now, I'm about at that point where I need to rebuild everything and just start over.
Yeah.
So now I'm starting to look at Vagrant and everything else.
It's very nice for providing like that kind of backend agnostic tooling for a lot of stuff, like because it has the Docker backend, it has VirtualBox, it has VMware, and yet it's not so opinionated that it'll prevent you from running your CLI specific tooling. Like if I need to go into VBox and tell it like turn off this network interface, it won't prevent me from doing that.
And then Mark in the chat, you can also use it with Ansible or Chef or whatever like that. In fact, like I would use it to like test my Ansible scripts locally to like ensure that they worked. It's a built-in provider. So it's like super extensible. A lot of things to plug into, or already things have been written for it. It's really fun.
Now, is it the typical case with the HashiCorp stuff where each backend is actually a separate Go binary that uses the SDK? Or is that...
So in the case of Vagrant, everything's written in Ruby.
Okay, but is it still like a separate process kind of thing where it's communicating via IPC?
To be honest, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure not. Pretty sure not.
So are they all shipped in as part of the standard Vagrant distribution then?
I think it would just be like you just literally, since it's everything written in Ruby, it'd just be like a Ruby gem, just kind of pulling that source in however, and then like I can monkey patch Vagrant to do anything that I want. Like I could just do anything that Ruby can do, making, random classes or just functions or anything along those lines.
Midway through your explanation, I realized that I was thinking of Packer.
Yeah, Packer would be the plugin, or Terraform or anything like that. That would be the Go plugin.
Yeah, people have done some crazy stuff with Packer too, where they'll like create an entire Raspberry Pi file system out of Packer.
Oh yeah,
the exact same tool that you use to make a AWS AMI. Like the range of flexibility on that tool is kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's used for all sorts of crazy stuff.
Okay. Also in the chat from Hitesh, John Ship, who's at UI Illinois, wanted to create an automated cuckoo analysis tool similar to what Emily was describing / wanted to know what happened to development. And there's a YouTube link in there as well.
Oh, hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can now.
Oh, hey, okay. Yeah, so John started this group called Open Network Software Monitoring, Open NSF, something like that. And yeah, he wanted to automate at a pretty large scale, like send thousands of samples to some cuckoo box that would do this. But so I joined his little project. But at some point, I think he went to join a startup in Boston. But yeah, John Ship's he worked at their high performance computing lab. He seems like a pretty knowledgeable guy. It'd be interesting to see if he's found anything.
The problem with these talks is, coming from the background I am and with my own goals, I always get distracted by a good MySec talk, wanting to just like throw away all of my actual goals and like pursue what somebody else is doing. It's definitely a temptation I'm struggling with right now, is to not just set up a malware lab and just play with that for the next month.
Oh, but it's so fun,
I know, but if I did it every month, then I'd never go deep on my own subjects.
Oh,
Yeah,
hey.
it's a tough balance.
Oh, I totally have that problem too, by the way. I almost forgot to ask, Kent, is there anything that you would like to share about Vagrant security considerations that we didn't touch on? Maybe VM escaping or anything like that? Working with HashiCorp might have some insider knowledge.
I think just like the main thing that you covered is that the intended use case of the tool is development environments. And so it's like makes it really easy to like connect to and stuff like that as like a default SSH key that it uses for the initial connection. And then it, recreates the SSH key and stuff like that. And those are all like, fine things, at least when you're setting up the thing for the most part. But at least like Vagrant, that it is very extensible. You can hack it to basically do anything that you want. And I have done a lot of really weird stuff with it. So you can definitely like bend it to your will to make it something that could be more suitable for malware analysis locally on your laptop and that kind of constrained sense. But you can basically shell out to do any sort of like VirtualBox commands that you need to do or anything like that to customize it to your needs. But again, you just got to look out for those kind of gotchas that are going to be there. Because it is trying to make things really easy to connect. That's why it has that shared folder by default and stuff like that. So those are the main things you got to look out for, and you'd already touched most of
that. Have you been able to play around with creating aliases for Vagrant using the alias command?
Honestly, that's one thing I didn't know about Vagrant. Didn't know you could do the alias commands like that. I would make it do weird things in other ways because you can do so many weird things. The magic of Ruby, if you want to, it's pretty nice like that. So like checking environment variables and stuff like that to configure certain things is how I usually do it.
Dude, finding something Kent doesn't know about a HashiCorp tool, like gold star, honestly.
There's a lot of really cool stuff with it.
We're going to mark this moment down in MySec history that you maneuvered around him on that one.
I'm so glad this is being recorded.
Oh, it's live right now. Nobody can deny it happened.
There we go.
Oh my god.
There's a lot of documentation.
Yeah, Emily touched on it in her talk, but like I really want to emphasize that, especially if you're trying to do like a fail closed networking kind of thing and not allow things to communicate outside by accident, that default Vagrant network interface with the NAT interface that it'll put on one, you have to turn that off, whether it's via vbox manage on the CLI, whether it's in the GUI or whatever else. In order to really get a fail closed kind of environment, you have to turn that off. It will break Vagrant's commands like Vagrant suspend, Vagrant destroy, Vagrant up. It won't give you a nice error message on it. It'll just sit there hanging all day, complaining that nothing's responding on an interface. It's still a major win in my book because you're able to bootstrap your entire lab in a repeatable way that's documented via source control. It's a very infrastructure as code kind of deal from that. But you'll break the standard Vagrant dev workflow, and it's just something you have to live with when you're setting that kind of thing up.
And at first, like when I first ran into it, I was like, oh, can I even make a malware lab with Vagrant? I'm gonna not use Vagrant. What?
That was what I ran into too. I like walked away from my computer just frustrated that I didn't know how technology worked. And
yeah, and
that's just how it works.
Well, to be fair for me, I need to take a step back and really understand like what was happening. Like, okay, what's Vagrant doing? What's VirtualBox doing? What's my host doing? And how is the networking like actually working between my virtual boxes and my host? And how when connected to NAT is that virtual box actually speaking out? What can it see? That was something that I didn't understand. I understood like generally, but I didn't understand fully until I took away that NAT adapter and couldn't access the box. But
Yeah.
it was like it was I don't want to be like it's a non-problem, but it was a very easy to fix problem as a human being clicking around the computer. It's something I think that like after because I talked to Kent about it for a little while in terms of like ways to work around it. There are ways to work around it. I think I touched on like writing something into the Vagrant file that will disconnect that NAT. Um, but something to remember.
If you go to their GitHub issue tracker too, there was an issue filed against Vagrant for this very thing where people wanted to be able to use a non-NAT adapter so that they could preserve the rest of their networking infrastructure. And basically, don't quote me on this, even though it's live on YouTube and everybody could quote me on it. But what the people basically came back with was saying that, yeah, it would be nice, but it's not inside of the current plans for Vagrant. Like, that's not quite the niche they're going for. They've got other features that are higher up there, which I think is kind of a shame because, like, we've spent this much time talking on it, and imagine all the additional use cases it could easily be put in for if that wasn't the case. But as it is, it's just, yeah, something you have to work around.
And that kind of stuff really goes to like the advantage of being able to monkey patch things, because you can just monkey patch the exact like core if you needed to. You have to obviously figure out how to do that to your specific needs and not break everything else.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call it out of the realm of possibility to have to be able to do that. But obviously not having done it, kind of, who knows?
Yeah, just thinking
posted
about it.
Concept about it, and like I will start using it tomorrow, honestly. But like I'm far enough out of the Vagrant code base that the time investment on monkey patching Vagrant to work that way without potentially breaking it like at the next Vagrant update or whatever is just high enough that I'd rather eject it from the Vagrant workflow.
Yep, totally agree.
And on the word of workflow, like I'm not looking to hang out with Vagrant all week. You know, like that's not my scene. I like Vagrant and I appreciate tools like Vagrant that help simplify the development process. But really I'm looking to analyze malware, you know. So in terms of like a tool that within a week I could like spit up and running and like get like a little malware lab going that essentially lives on forever, that's awesome. And monkey patching like is something I totally want to do, but it's just like a cherry on top of the already beautiful Sunday.
Well, that just shows that you're a pragmatic person as opposed to my dumpster fire professional.
I saw you there's the Vagrant script you shared and it's looking good. You got multiple machines in there. Honestly, it's looking better than my current GitHub repo right now. So you should be
Aside
proud.
from the fact that it doesn't do what it was designed.
I was gonna ask, does it work?
Well, so we talked on that earlier. Like before the stream started, I've got to get the PF sense configuration built in there and so on, so the network actually does what it's supposed to.
Yeah. And I kind of like to like I'm a big planner person. I really enjoy having like a definitive location to store the files that I use for XYZ box like in a place stored instead of like I'm like, where do I keep my scripts? Everything is a gist, you know? So it's just kind of like a better mental compartmentalization in terms of like, what am I doing? What do I have? Well.
Good stuff.
Don't worry, I'm downloading Vagrant now.
Perfect.
Won't be long.
It only took like several years. It's fine.
You're gonna have a virtual machine in like 2 minutes.
Now I just want to I want to make an entire environment. I want to go to town and go crazy. And then I'll get myself stuck in some weird problem and I'll be there for like 4 hours.
I'll be
Man.
there for you. Don't worry.
Yeah. I had a real mental leap between the Vagrant. I for whatever reason I was like very married to like one Vagrant file per box, and I didn't want to mess around with the multi-machine Vagrant file. But it really is not. It is painless. I couldn't believe it.
Oh yeah, and all the advantages that come with that, like being able to just say Vagrant up, and suddenly you've got like 5 VMs that are coming up in sync as one whole environment.
It
Like
feels
that's
good.
to me the reason why I kept harping on about the whole NAT interface thing, was because it was heartbreaking to me that I couldn't spin up 5 VMs up and down and have it be completely safe. But even just being able to spin them up was just such a big win compared with click, 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 click.
Yeah, clone. Where's my clone at?
Yeah.
Damn it, I modified the clone and I didn't make a snapshot again. Like I did last month.
Like Tony's book is a huge win, but like if you lose the files for that environment, or you don't have a ton of disk to just store it around all the time, like if you have to manually set that up every time you want to have it going again, like it's a major obstacle for learning.
I think that I don't know if I'm remembering this properly, but I'm pretty confident that I saw the author of building virtual Tony. I think it's Tony, the guy's name.
Yeah, DA6.
Yeah. I think I saw him talking about like wanting to use Vagrant in order to like update that book, or like the next step from there. He was talking about in like some capacity about modernizing that book and creating like a repeatable environment.
I know he talked about how it was like a path untaken where he just doesn't know those tools, and so that's why he didn't use them.
Yeah, I think
that
we might be
also-
talking about the same tweet. Yeah.
Yep. Might have even been in the book, but yeah, that was the other part of it too, is I wanted to do like the blog posts that would kind of be a companion piece and be like, hey, here's how you can do it in Vagrant.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, if anybody wants to fork the repo I have so far and take it the rest of the way, like I would not be opposed to that at all either.
The power of open source.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Like take my shitty code and make it unshitty, and there you go. Now you can be the famous guy.
I genuinely don't know how I would have developed before the GitHub. I really just don't understand people that did that, unless SourceForge was in fact just like GitHub. But
So do you mean GitHub or do you mean version control?
I mean, I'm a noob with 2 O's, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think code's cool. So I like just go on to GitHub and like randomly look and look for inspiration, just read what other people are doing. Like for just like to, if I'm not making myself clear, like I don't think I can like pull down, I don't know, like the code for the Splunk sim and just take a look at that and see how that's actually operating behind the scenes.
Well, so it would have just been, you'd go to like the Splunk website and there would be either CVS or an SVN repository, or you download tarball of the source code and just, expand it and read the source from there.
That sounds lonely.
Yeah, like it's like for me, like I totally get the noob thing. Like I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, oh dude, I'm so glad smarter people than me really got more frustrated than I did and was able to explain it to someone like me. So I could be like, how the hell do you do this? How to geek. Hey, I could just do this shit on my own now. Sorry.
No, yeah, 100%.
I don't know that they were necessarily smarter than you. I mean, granted, Linus Torvalds is probably smarter than most of us, but like they had, like there was less stuff in the world. So whereas you might go and build a certain lab of like this, like they didn't necessarily have those things available to them. So they just said, okay, well, I'll build this tool for this and so on. Like conceptually, these things aren't out of the reach of any of us. It's just they were the ones who actually had to go forward and deal with them. Like I could talk for an hour or two about stuff like directed graphs and so on, and like the low level objects in Git, and you'd say, okay, like from there I could kind of understand where the tool came from, but like that didn't have to be your concern.
Right. Yeah. I think like for me more, it's more like my brain wasn't really like adaptable and configured to get to the level that they were at yet completely. Like when I first started like at NIT, I was a sysadmin student assistant. And like I remember everyone's like, oh, well, what do you know about this? I was like, not much. And they're like, read the man page. And it just kind of clicked me off. Like now I'm good with it. But it was like when I'd go to different sites and they were able to just kind of take a chunk of something and explain how everything worked differently. Just I guess more of like wasn't the GUI sense. It was just I don't know. It was just differently explained than a man page. And I was able to get it. And then finally, when I was able to get it, I was able to go to a man page and go, yeah, now I totally get this layout. I don't know what it was kind of like logarithms. I was just like, I don't know what this is. And all of a sudden it's like, I got it.
Well, like man pages in particular, though, were really written as references for people who already understood it. Like the standard thing with old school Unix was not even read the man page. It was, well, if you want to know how that works, go read the code.
Yeah, right.
And that was like a major problem we had, where people would say RTFM and they would think like, oh, well, man pages are manuals, so go read the man page. Like that's not actually a sane way of learning anything. It's just like 35 command line switches in front of you and just absorb what the use cases are from those. It's more of like, what does -n do again?
That's because you have to try all 35 of the switches until you figure out which one does what. And you're like, all right, I got it now. Don't worry about the man page. I just tried 35 times. I got it.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah.
My favorite thing I learned later in life was the -- help. And I was like, what does this do? Oh, thank you, man. I'm sorry, dude. There's only so much I could just kind of read this man page.
I don't think there's a command that I've used that I haven't run -dash help on, aside from maybe CD and ls.
Right. I know.
And then one of the funny things about man pages is that sometimes they're just so bad. Like probably like the one that sticks out to me the most, or just like probably just like the most egregious, and just for me personally. But if you do man sudoers, it'll have a quick guide to EBNF, which is a whole syntax for how they do the sudoers file, and it's a quick introduction that's like 4 pages long or something of like getting started in this crazy syntax for describing a formal language for describing languages. Super terrible thing to have in a man page.
And the man page format, frankly, like much as I love my terminal stuff, it's not the most friendly to just sit down and read anything long form in that style. Like,
So I'm a freak of nature, and I really enjoy reading man pages. They're all unique. And yeah, like I don't know if you heard me throw out that super cow reference during the talk, but that's a man page reference. I forgot to what command. It might be, I can't remember. It might be SSH or something. I can't remember. But it's a reference to this like really cheeky man page. Some of them suck though, for sure. Like some of them I read, after I read it, I'm like, I feel worse as a human being. I'm like, oh, obviously I can't interpret information. And that might not necessarily be my fault. Sometimes that might be the author's fault, but
No, I get it. Like I go to if I'm interested in a really like a new flavor or distribution or something like that, I'm just like, oh, okay, well I'll just download all your documentation and then I'll throw it up on my tablet, and then like while I'm trying to get my kid to sleep, I'll just read an entire documentation, like what's your entire operating system and how it works. And it's like, this is gonna be 1,000 pages. It's like, well, I got some time to kill.
yeah, I think
1,000 pages of good reading.
I know.
I've been binge reading the AWS docs lately, trying to get up to speed. First, it was for some MySec related stuff. Now it's for some work related things as well, and like trying to get ready for one of the certs. And yeah, it's just page after page of stuff, and it's all good and it's interesting to learn how it works. But for whatever reason, when it came to the man pages, like it never really got along with me. Like I could go out and buy a 700-page book at Barnes and Noble or whatever and just sit down and enjoy that. But like it might be my reading style, but overall it's just always felt to me like the man pages were good for a quick refresher on stuff, and beyond that, like I couldn't get anything out of them personally.
I think it really kind of depends. Like for me, like what I'm kind of a weird. What I read, I don't know what it is. I enjoy walking and reading at the same time, and then man, I can like absorb anything, and I have no idea why it works like that. But I can just go in a circle, or even go down a walk through a sidewalk for like blocks. I'm good. But there's
So I
like
did
one.
that.
I'm sorry.
I did that through my computer programming associates. Actually, I was like working like 40 something hours and going to school full time, and I had no time for anything. And I really needed to lose weight at the time. So I, in between like 3 hours I had like after class but before work, I would study for my tests while jogging at a local park. And it was really hard at first, but I'll tell you, you really can like you can really modify yourself in many regards. And I've modified my learning strategies so many times, from like literally reading dictionaries and like actual hard text encyclopedias in the 90s to now. And it is difficult. I really do feel like it's difficult to modify your learning strategies switching over to digital text.
Yeah.
Honestly, as soon as you said that you were doing the dictionary thing, I just have to bow to you and your ability to absorb things from tomes. Like, if the Necronomicon was placed in front of you right now, I believe you just be able to flip through the thing and be like, yeah, okay. I don't know why people are going insane from this, but like I thought it was just really interesting reading.
I have like something in my brain where I really enjoy almost everything. So
Yeah.
I make it easier.
I enjoy a lot of things, but you're like next level, and I admire it. I want you to know that.
I'm like this. I appreciate a lot of things for just existing. So it's like my base. Somebody wrote that dictionary. Well, a couple of people, but
No, dude. Do you have for example, like the Webster's Dictionary application on your phone, like app for like the word of the day?
no.
Oh, it's so fun.
No, I used to, and I'm at a point where now I'm like, if I do not focus what I choose to teach myself on a daily basis, I will spiral out of control and kind of like not grow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
like, well, at least not like in the very specific direction that I want to grow in. Otherwise, like right now, I have Duolingo. I have that Duolingo app. Russian's on there. Polish is on there. I've got Mandarin on there. I don't need to be.
I'm so frustrated with Duolingo after so many
Why?
tries. Because like I don't have enough immersion sources of learning for any of the languages I've tried. And so eventually with Duolingo, I'll eventually reach the point where I fit full equilibrium and I'm forgetting as many things as I'm learning.
Yeah, immersion's so important. I've got family members that speak Polish.
Now, see, if I had
Polish
that,
first.
I would absolutely be picking up the Polish stuff and then trying to hold conversations with them. But for me, it's like, oh, maybe I'll learn German to get a family connection with my ancestors. Yeah, well, guess what? Every Strum who's ever spoken German is long dead. There's no living connection there to help me out with.
I thought it might be cool to be able to read Cyrillic or Mandarin in case I see anything weird in my strings. Then I'd like to be able to know what it's saying. I mean, I could spit into Google, but sometimes I'm like, Google, that's not what I'm like. I don't speak Mandarin, but that's not what it says.
How many times when you're reversing something and you just see like crazy, like that looks like it's Chinese or like some other language, you're like, oh, what is that? And you Google it and it's like, it's still nothing actually.
We had kind of a fun experience while I was interning. We had some like machines that were pretty new. They were non-critical. They're like kind of personal, but they were on the network. Not personal to me, but like they were not really used for. Anyway, I'm not gonna get into it. Anyway, so there's these machines, and like we do a scan of the environment, and their names are all in Chinese, and no one's ever seen them before. Oh, that's really funny. But we ran into Google and then found out it was just the printers, so it's cool. But this is very scary to be like, let's, as just like an intern, just being like, everyone's like, oh, there's nothing on there. We already did the work. Just go ahead and do the thing. And
You
then
know,
come
I'm
back.
sure that like reverse engineering and infosec stuff combined with somebody who knows Mandarin really well would be extremely well sought after in the intelligence community.
Yeah.
Which is
To be
slightly
honest,
unfortunate because the intelligence community is also like rather infamous for being tied to the GS pay scale and so on, where like you eventually reach the point where your skills would go much higher in private industry than they do public
mhm.
sector. But
And then there's also like the benefit of even like my benefit if I wanted to learn like a language like Mandarin or something like that is that there's like a whole programming like community that like speaks that language. And like I don't get to like know what they're like working on, or like what I do get to know, like I'm still like able to, communicate through the code, so to speak. Like I can kind of like read and get an idea. But it's just like there's like such an advantage. I just want to like be able to immerse myself in their documentation and their community and stuff they're working on, be able to contribute. And like it almost requires to have to learn their language just to like be able to like get on common ground, because like they might be able to speak a little bit of English, and then like you can kind of like meet in the middle if you could like learn a little bit of each other's languages.
oh yeah,
If you got a second language in your pocket, like Spanish too, don't forget to search for your infosec stuff in Spanish. Because I've read a few articles in Spanish that just had information that wasn't available in English, because everyone who was making those English articles were just ripping off of each other. And those people, they didn't speak Spanish, so I was able to find some information that wasn't yet stolen, which is like cool. If you get, steal away, you should cite. But it is just nice to find some fresh information, like a fresh perspective on a problem you're having.
at the
And
risk of sounding a little bit too paranoid, like there's been several like languages of science you could say over time where like at one time high learning would have all been done in Latin, and then later on like science or diplomacy was done in French, and now we've shifted over to the language of English. And there's that little part of my brain that's worried that like I might live to the time frame where the primary language for that shifts away from English to something else like Mandarin or so on, which is actually one of my motivations for like maybe I should learn this while my brain is still young and like neuroplastic and able to pick things up. But I don't know. Strange times.
Yeah, same concerns.
Yeah, not to switch topics. It's pretty much on the same topic, but we were talking about like learning and related to, excuse me, of different like languages and how they're working. Have either of you, anyone actually in this group, have you guys read the recent book by Andy Green something? No, I'm not going to do it very well, but it's called Sandworm.
No, not familiar.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I've so funny you're talking about reading and walking. I've been jogging to the audiobook. I'm like halfway through
good.
it.
It's so good.
So the audiobook, if you're wondering, I don't care for the guy who's reading it, but I'm real touchy, with the like if the if I don't know, that's just a audiobook thing. But
I'm the same way. Like it comes out to being like all my friends are like, oh, have you listened to the Harry Potter audiobook, for example? And there's the American version, which is Jim Dale or something like that. But I listen to it via Stephen Fry. So if it's not Stephen Fry, I'm just like, nope, not happening. I can't do it. So it's voices too. There's another author or reader I can't stand. He reads some series called Hell something else. It's Frank Herbert's son wrote a book about it. And the guy just talks so dramatic. He's like, everything is amazing in this place. And it's like, oh, man. But for those, everybody else that's not familiar with Sandworm, it's a really great book. I really highly recommend that you check it out. Essentially, it's a deep dive on, essentially it goes through the entire security apparatus and architecture of how Russia is using the Ukraine as a location for kind of a test ground on a lot of their IT security and penetration, such as like NotPetya. They go over like how NotPetya escaped out of Odessa and then beat the crap out of all Maersk's systems.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I think they
keep going.
drop you in like 2004 or something like that, or the early 2000s, right? If I'm not
Right.
mistaken.
Yeah. They start off actually not even in the Ukraine. They do technically talk about the Ukraine at the beginning with, but they're actually going to start off with everything. So Russia's first vector was not the Ukraine. It was actually going to be Georgia was their testing ground, as well as Estonia. For anyone that's really familiar with Estonia, when that happened, that was really fun to read. And then but they're pretty much showing how the bounds are. It's again, code isn't really. It's not paying attention to national boundaries. It's not gonna be like, I'm sorry, this is great. They will attack anything they attack. But Sandworm essentially came up to it because of the fact that when someone was able to open it up, they were actually able to see that the beginning of it, the coder was actually attributing everything to the old Dune series from Frank Herbert, and that's where Sandworm came from. I really personally, because I'm a Dune nerd and have been forever, I really think they should have gone with Bene Gesserits, but Sandworm works good too. Shia Lute is fine.
I thought that was really cool. I thought it's beautiful, like, to kind of get insight in how do they name malware.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. I'm kind of definitely in this group here. I'm definitely gonna be the most noob of the noobs, so I'm not as familiar with this area. So, but to kind of like you seeing the lab earlier today, I was like, oh, that looks really interesting. I put that on my my Trello board, which is constantly ever expanding, of things I should learn and actually look into. And but thinking about it from looking at that Sandworm book and just how it was just randomly they just opened up that directory and was like, oh, look at this files. Oh, he's labeling everything as a treatise and Harkonnen and different things. I'm like, that's amazing.
It's even though I knocked the audiobook guy, it's exciting to listen to. Kind of feels like you're doing the analysis.
Right, it does. Yeah, like he did a really, really fantastic job of just the investigation, and a lot of it's going to be and really it really woke me up more to the SCADA systems to actually understand how vulnerable SCADA systems are. And at the time, I always kind of knew like SCADA was not like, oh, we lost an engine, it's okay, we'll just go buy one from the factory. GE just has these lying around. They really don't. And it made me really think about. I remember when I was like, God, I think I was listening to George Carlin when I was like 16, and he had a good point. And it just kind of popped in my head. I just heard an old George, like, kind of cranky voice in my head. His joke was, if you want to make human civilization go back to the Dark Ages within 3 minutes, turn off their electricity. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then when I was listening to the sorry, I'm a little tired, so I can't remember exactly the lab, but it's in Idaho when they did a test where they blew up a diesel system that actually is running your electricity and how they're running that background. When I listened to that, I was like, that was just a simple couple lines of code, and it's so insecure. And like listening to the book really kind of made me aware of that. And actually, I don't know if do you guys listen to a lot of podcasts at all?
I mean, I do.
I'm still looking for more podcasts. I've listened to a couple. I haven't found any that like I'm a like dedicated listener yet.
There's a couple that I really hardcore listen to. For example, like industrial security podcasts. They go through SCADA systems, just fantastic. Malicious Life is great. They do a deep dive on a lot of things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I listen
I'm
to
sure
Malicious Life. That's a good one.
that one's really good. And Darknet Diaries, I love them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think we got a local group. Was it Breaking InfoSec?
Breaking down
Or was it Breaking Down Security?
Is BreakSec what you're thinking of? It might be Breaking Down Security as well, but
Let me check
Amanda
my
Berlin is on
YouTube.
That one, at
Yeah.
Infrastructure. Yep, she comes up and hangs out with us sometimes. Super cool whenever she does.
Is that your guys' thing?
No, I'm not involved.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just saying that like sometimes she's come up to say the MySec Southfield social and she's just hung out. Super cool. Love seeing her every time that she's up here as well.
Yeah, she's a joy to have around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amanda, if you're watching this, we miss you. Please join us again. Come into the chat.
Yeah, we miss you.
All right, guys, I'm
Yeah.
going to cut off the streaming part of this. Zoom is not going to shut off, so we can keep talking or whatever. I just don't want to like keep it running forever.
Makes sense.
So
If anyone's interested, I could send you a list of like some podcasts that I found. I've just been bouncing around for a while, and usually they recommend others. There's kind of like
Totally.
an. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
remember.
go ahead. No, I'm an interrupter. Go right
No,
ahead.
it's okay. It's all right. Like I was gonna say, if anyone's interested, there's a really good one that I highly recommend, and the one